I'm Hannah Pierce, 25, and the morning I walked into Harvard Yard in a black gown and a square cap, the air felt lighter than I expected and heavier than I could explain. Crimson banners lifted in the May wind, drums rolled somewhere near the library steps, and the crowd sounded like a river bright moving endless. My twin Lily matched my pace, as if we were still two girls trading turns on the front steps. At home only today, there were cameras, bouquets, and 100 small, eager eyes following her smile. When our mother raised her hand to wave, I saw that familiar warmth bloom across her face, and then settle a moment longer on my sister. By the time we reached the family row, applause folded over us like sunlight, and all I could think was that this day would mark more than one ending. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand tall when it would have been easier to shrink tap like and subscribe so this story finds the next person who needs it. I grew up in a modest ranch house on a quiet street where the maples draped their shade across the sidewalk in summer and the heat clicked on like clockwork in January. Donna taught us to write prompt thank you notes and to return a borrowed dish cleaner than we received it. Robert lectured gently about living within our means and holding our heads high, even when the week stretched longer than the paycheck. We shared a kitchen table scored by years of elbows and homework, and if something broke an outlet, the Wi-Fi, the blinking microwave clock, I was the one who fetched the toolbox and made it right. My parents said we were fortunate, and I agreed, even as I learned to stretch coupons, patch a loose fence board, and keep the family laptop alive long past its warranty. That was our measure of pride. Steady hands neighbors, you could count on a front yard trimmed by someone who cared enough to notice the line. Harvard felt like a different country. At first, shiny and wide, all glass study rooms and halls named for people I'd only ever met in textbooks. I carried the old values with me. Finish what you start, speak, only when you have something worth saying. Don't spend money you don't have, and place them alongside classmates who wore ease like a second skin. There were afternoons when the smell of cut grass on the yard sent me right back to our block at home, and nights when I coded until the screen blurred, reminding myself that forward is forward even when no one claps. Lily found her corner of this new world quickly. She had a way of ribboning into any circle, drawing out laughter, smoothing the rough edge of an awkward moment. I respected it like a craft I didn't possess, and when people mistook my quiet for distance, I let them, trusting outcomes over impressions. On the morning of commencement, I woke before the sun and sat by the window with a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, listening to the city start its day below. The words from home moved through my mind. Keep your balance lead with your work. Be gracious. And I realized how they had shaped me into someone who could walk into a room, take stock, and carry more than she was asked to carry. There's a comfort in being the person others lean on, and a cost, and I had paid both without receipts. By the time I stepped onto the grass in my gown, I had already decided I would treat this day like a clean page, no comparisons, no tally, just the truth of finishing what I began. Names rose and fell over the loudspeakers, while the breeze lifted the edge of my cap. My mother smoothed Lily's tassel, and my father tugged his jacket straight, as if a photograph waited around every corner. The joy around us was real cheers, Flowers, a little boy in a clip-on tie, dancing near a stroller, and I let it touch me without asking it to fix anything it couldn't. When we reached our seats again, Lily's laugh carried across the row the way it always had, bright and easy, and my mother's eyes went soft in a way I recognized from 100 other afternoons. I told myself there was room here for more than one kind of pride. And then I noticed our mother's hand slip into her bag, fingers finding a thick envelope tied with a ribbon and a second thinner one tucked beneath it, and something inside me went very still as the next name echoed across the yard. The applause from the ceremony still echoed in my ears when we walked down the brick path toward the family. My gown brushed the grass, the heat from the sun warming my shoulders through the fabric. Mom's perfume reached me before her arms did, floral and familiar, and then she swept Lily into a tight hug, her voice trembling as she said, "You deserve this, sweetheart. You've worked so hard." I watched her slip an ivory envelope tied with a red ribbon into my sister's hands. The edges of it caught the sunlight as Lily gasped and opened it, revealing a brochure of glossy photographs, Paris, Rome, and Venice, printed in looping gold script. "A trip to Europe," Mom said proudly. "All expenses paid." The words hung in the air long enough for nearby families to glance over, smiling at the spectacle. Lily beamed her laughter bright, her eyes shining. When Mom turned toward me, her smile remained, but the warmth behind it thinned. She handed me a smaller envelope, plain white, my name written neatly across the front. "And for you, honey," she said. I opened it expecting maybe a handwritten note or something simple, but heartfelt. Inside was a $10 coffee shop gift card and a small folded card that read, "Gratitude makes life richer." Dad added softly, "It's important to remember the little things, Hannah. Life isn't always about grand adventures." The moment stretched awkwardly. Around us, people were laughing and taking photos, the kind of background noise that makes silence even louder. I forced a polite smile, nodded, and thanked them, careful to keep my voice steady. Lily tucked the envelope into her purse, still glowing from the attention, while Mom listed the cities she'd visit: Paris for the art Rome, for the history Zurich, for the chocolate. I listened quietly, holding my diploma against my chest. The red leather felt cool under my fingers. From a distance, we probably looked like any proud family celebrating together, but I could feel the divide widening, invisible yet impossible to ignore. One child received the world, the other was told to be grateful for a small corner of it. That night, we gathered at home for dinner, a long table dressed in a white tablecloth and candlelight. The cake in the center read, "Congratulations, Lily and Hannah." Though Lily's name stretched across most of the icing, the letters twice as large. I noticed it but said nothing. I'd noticed details like that my whole life. Mom poured champagne into fluted glasses and gave another toast to Lily's new adventure. Dad raised his glass, talking about how proud he was of both his daughters, though he added almost casually that Lily clearly had a gift for leadership. I smiled again, the expression practiced by now, and cut myself a small piece of cake while they discussed travel plans and flight times. As laughter circled the table, I sat in that familiar seat, the one between pride and invisibility, and let the sound blur. My parents had always said they loved us equally, but it never felt like balance. Lily had the lightness that drew people in. She could make any mistake look charming. I'd been the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who fixed the Wi-Fi or reset the password or paid the forgotten bill. When the printer jammed, I solved it. When a credit card was declined, I handled the call. Those things didn't earn applause. They were just expected. I remembered being 10 at the town's small recital hall. I'd spent weeks practicing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata fingers, aching from repetition. When I finished, the room clapped politely, and from the back Mom called, "You should be softer, Hannah. Music isn't math." I nodded, even as my throat tightened. Then Lily took her turn. She missed several notes, but she smiled through every one glowing under the lights. When she finished, Mom rushed up to hug her and said, "That was beautiful. You played with heart." I stood to the side, clutching my sheet music, pretending I hadn't heard the difference. Moments like that never needed to be spoken aloud to be understood. Years passed and those patterns deepened. When Dad's computer froze, he called me. When Mom couldn't log into her email, she handed me the phone. I learned early that love in our house wasn't measured by warmth, it was measured by usefulness. Lily could make them laugh, but I was the one who kept the lights on both literally and figuratively. I never complained. I thought that maybe by being dependable, by doing what needed to be done, I'd earn the kind of pride they gave her so easily. By my sophomore year, I had started freelancing as a software designer for a medical tech startup in California. The pay was steady, and by the time I turned 21, I was making more than I ever imagined. One evening, Dad called, his voice heavy with worry. "The mortgage just went up," he said. "We're barely keeping up." Mom sighed in the background, mentioning the roof repairs and rising costs. I didn't hesitate. That night, I opened my bank app and set up an automatic transfer to their account every month, $3,000, to cover what they couldn't. I labeled the memo line, "Pierce Household Hannah Contribution." From then on, the payments went through like clockwork. The stress in Mom's voice faded. She sounded lighter on our calls. I thought she knew where the help came from. I thought they both did. But when she spoke to neighbors, she credited the bank for giving them a lucky extension. When she bragged to family about Lily's internship in New York, she never once mentioned that I was the one keeping the house afloat. I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe it didn't then. Graduation night, sitting at that table surrounded by laughter, something in me shifted. Mom turned to me near the end of dinner, her tone gentle but pointed. "You should learn to be content with less. Hannah," she said, "gratitude makes life richer. Remember." I nodded, but the words hit differently this time. They no longer sounded like advice. They sounded like a boundary drawn in permanent ink. When the dishes were cleared and the lights dimmed, I lingered at the table after everyone left. The old clock ticked steadily on the wall. The smell of frosting and wax hung in the air. For the first time, I realized how quiet a house can feel when your presence doesn't quite belong. Upstairs, I pulled my suitcase from the closet and began folding clothes. My laptop, my hard drives, the receipts for every mortgage payment, I packed them neatly, each one a record of what I had done for them. Outside, the night was cool and still. I loaded the suitcase into my car, the sound of the trunk closing echoing across the empty street. As I drove away from that house, the same one I had helped keep standing, I didn't cry. The city lights reflected off the windshield, small and steady, like signals leading somewhere new. I crossed the bridge toward Cambridge, where the skyline shimmered above the river. The windows of my new apartment waited dark and silent, but to me, they looked like a beginning. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust. I set my bags down, opened the window, and let the wind move through. The space was bare, but it felt lighter than anything I'd known. I turned off the family's shared location tracker, changed my passwords, and updated every account. The screen glowed in the dim room, one line at a time, cutting the last invisible cords. I made a cup of ramen, sat on the floor, and watched the steam rise. The hum of traffic outside mixed with the low whistle of the radiator. It wasn't silence exactly, it was peace. I opened my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote a single line in the center. If they want to learn gratitude, I'll teach it with silence. Morning came pale and clean through the window. Sunlight touched the wooden floor like a promise. For the first time, my phone didn't buzz with reminders from the bank or messages about bills. I brewed coffee, sat by the open window, and listened to the quiet city below. My heart didn't feel heavy. It felt still balanced, waiting. Somewhere in that calm, I knew something inevitable was coming. The world I had held together was starting to realize it couldn't stand without me. And when the phone finally rang again, it would be the beginning of a conversation that would end everything they thought they could control. The first week in my new apartment passed quietly. Each morning, sunlight pooled across the wooden floor, spreading in soft gold until it reached the desk where my laptop waited. The hum of streetcars below mixed with the steady rhythm of the city waking up, and for the first time, I didn't have to listen for anyone else's footsteps. My work filled the hours easily. MetaView Labs had sent me 2 new contracts, both complex but familiar, and I lost myself in the code. Nights ended with soft jazz playing through my small speaker, a mug of tea cooling beside the keyboard, and the sense that I was finally breathing on my own schedule. On Sunday morning, my phone lit up across the table. The name on the screen froze me for a moment, Mom. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice came through unsteady, half sob, half accusation. "Hannah, what did you do to the mortgage account? The bank keeps calling. They said this month's payment was canceled." I stayed still, looking out the window at the bright blue sky. "I stopped paying," I said calmly. "I don't live there anymore." There was silence, the kind that stretches long enough to fill a room. Then Dad's voice broke through, sharper, tighter. "What do you mean, stopped paying? You can't just walk away. We're family." "I helped for 18 months, Dad," I said, keeping my tone even. "Now I'm learning to be grateful in my own way." On the other end, I heard a rush of voices overlapping, Mom crying harder, Dad calling me ungrateful, selfish, irresponsible. I didn't argue. When they ran out of words, I said quietly, "I don't owe anyone anything anymore," and ended the call. The room fell back into stillness, the kind that hums after a storm has passed. My phone buzzed again and again until the screen went dark. I set it face down, opened my laptop, and kept working. That night, as the streetlights flickered on outside, an email notification appeared. The subject line was clinical. Please confirm request to add backup payment to mortgage account. My stomach tightened. I opened the message, reading it twice to be sure. The bank had received a request initiated by Robert Pierce to link my old account as a backup payment method. Below it were 2 buttons, confirm or decline. My hands felt cold on the keyboard. I didn't click either. Instead, I called the number listed at the bottom of the email. The woman who answered had a calm, practiced voice. After verifying my identity, she explained the details in careful, professional tones. The request was submitted through the customer portal this morning by Robert Pierce. The routing number matches the account previously used for automatic payments. I thanked her, then asked to be transferred to the Electronic Transactions Department. The next representative confirmed each step: the timestamp, the login device, the attached note that read, "Maintain timely payments." I listened without interrupting, then said, "I do not authorize this change. That account no longer belongs to this mortgage. Please freeze all modifications and mark this as unauthorized." The specialist hesitated only long enough to type, "Understood. We'll flag the account for fraud review and issue you a case reference number." I repeated the number back to her twice, wrote it in my notebook, and requested a confirmation email. When we hung up, I organized the proof like I would any project orderly documented safe. Every transfer from the last 18 months went into a single folder. Evidence, Pierce House. Subfolders followed history. Emails, screenshots, case notes. I built a small spreadsheet listing each payment labeled with the memo I'd written every time Pierce household, Hannah contribution. Next to the final line, I typed, "Stopped after graduation." I didn't feel anger so much as a hard, cold clarity. This wasn't an accident. It was an attempt to keep control under the name of family. I opened my password manager, changed every login connected to the old accounts, enabled multi-step verification, and deleted shared access. When I was done, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen's faint glow. For the first time, I saw what boundaries looked like when written in numbers instead of words. 3 days later, I drove back to Newton. The sky hung low, the color of tarnished silver. I parked in front of the house, the same one whose mortgage I had carried, and sat in silence before stepping out. The lawn looked freshly cut, but the edges near the walkway had gone brown. The front door stood slightly open as if waiting. Dad met me in the doorway. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture still stiff with pride. "We need to talk," he said. I followed him into the living room. Mom sat on the couch, her eyes red. Lily leaned against the doorway, arms folded, expression guarded. The air in the room felt heavy like a storm building behind glass. Dad started first. "We just want to keep the house, Hannah. You know what happens if the bank forecloses. This family loses everything. I only added a backup payment for safety." His words came quick, almost rehearsed. I met his gaze. "Safety for who, Dad? The house or your sense of control?" His jaw tightened. "Don't talk to me like that. You're still our daughter. This is a family responsibility." I stood still, letting the silence stretch. Then I said slowly, "I'm trying to keep my dignity." The words came out quieter than I expected, but they landed like a bell in the stillness. Mom lowered her head, her lip trembling. Lily stepped forward, voice clipped. "You're blowing this out of proportion. They're just scared." I turned to her, not angry, just tired. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I take it seriously because I'm the only one who knows what it costs." Her expression faltered. She looked down, saying nothing. I walked around the room once, taking in the photos on the walls, the lamp I had fixed, the router I had installed so they'd never lose internet again. Every object felt like a quiet reminder of what I'd given without recognition. When I reached the door, no one stopped me. The sound of the wind outside filled the silence as I stepped onto the porch. I stood for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of rain. Inside that house, the family I once carried was sitting among things I had helped preserve, but trust was something they'd never protected. I got in my car and started the engine. Through the rearview mirror, I saw them still standing in the doorway, smaller with each passing second. The road stretched ahead, slick with the first hint of drizzle, and I drove forward without looking back. That night back in Cambridge, the city lights glowed through the thin curtains of my apartment. I brewed tea and opened my laptop again. The folder labeled Evidence. Pierce House sat on the desktop, quiet and complete. I didn't delete it. I didn't add to it either. I just let it stay there, a reminder that silence could also be protection. The phone stayed dark that evening. The apartment felt neither empty nor full, just balanced. I took a slow sip of tea and sat by the window, watching the street below. For the first time, the thought of family didn't pull or ache. It simply existed like a chapter already written. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, streaking the glass with silver lines. Somewhere between the sound of cars passing and the distant ring of a church bell, I knew the quiet wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning they couldn't avoid much longer. After the day I left Newton, everything settled into a rhythm that felt almost unnatural at first. Mornings began with the sound of the streetcar humming past my window and the faint smell of roasted coffee drifting from the bakery downstairs. My work filled the quiet, easily hours of code-long meetings over video calls, the quiet concentration that made the hours dissolve. It wasn't loneliness. It was a kind of stillness I hadn't known before. Each line of work I completed was mine alone, untouched by family expectations or guilt. A few months passed like that. My reputation at Mediview Labs grew quietly, almost by accident. I met deadlines early, fixed bugs others had given up on, and redesigned an interface for one of our largest hospital clients. One evening, as I was wrapping up, a message appeared from my project manager, Mark Ellison. "You've got a gift for finding order in chaos," he wrote. "If you ever consider leading your own project, let's talk." I stared at the message for a while, unsure how to reply. The thought of leading something on my own felt distant, but the seed had been planted. By the end of that quarter, the walls of my apartment no longer felt temporary. The same small table where I once ate ramen now held a proper lamp, a vase with a single white lily, and a stack of notebooks filled with sketches and ideas. I had replaced the old folding chair with one sturdy enough to support long hours of work. It was a quiet home, modest, but it reflected the version of myself I was becoming: measured, independent, still learning to breathe without permission. Then, on a gray Saturday afternoon, my phone rang again. The sound startled me. It was the same tone I had almost forgotten to change since graduation. I let it ring once, twice before answering. Mom's voice came through sharp with panic. "Hannah, you need to call the bank right now. They're saying the mortgage hasn't been paid for 2 months. Your father is furious. They're threatening to start foreclosure proceedings." I could hear Dad in the background, his voice low but tight like a wire pulled too hard. "This is your fault," he said. "You walked away and left us with nothing." I stood by the window, the phone warm against my ear. "Dad?" I said, "You both had more than 1.5 years of payments already made. You could have planned for this." He cut me off. "Don't lecture me. You think you're better than us now with your fancy degree and your own apartment." His words landed heavy, but I didn't answer. I waited for the silence to swallow itself. Then softly I said, "I'm not coming back to fix it." The line went quiet, and I hung up. After that call, I sat for a long time without moving. The winter light fell across the floor, pale and cold. The same thought kept circling back. I had once believed love could be proven through effort, that if I worked hard enough, someone would finally see it. Now I understood effort was only invisible to those who refused to look. Work became my anchor. I buried myself in it, learning everything I could from Mark and the engineers on our team. He noticed the hours I kept the precision in my notes. One evening after a client review, he lingered on the call a moment longer. "You ever think about starting something of your own?" he asked. I laughed quietly. "That sounds like something for people who like attention." He smiled. "Not attention, control." The words stayed with me long after the screen went dark. By spring, I was working on 3 simultaneous projects: software that helped identify early signs of lung disease, another for diabetes care, and one designed to improve patient access to test results. Each one demanded focus, and I gave it everything. My life had narrowed down to the essentials: work quiet long walks along the river, and peace that came from knowing no one could use my success to measure my worth against another's. Then one evening, as the sun sank behind the buildings, an email arrived from a client at a healthcare startup I had freelanced for during college. "Hannah," it began, "you should think about building your own brand. People already recognize your design philosophy, quiet precision." The phrase caught me off guard. I read it 3 times, the words echoing back in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. Quiet precision. That was exactly who I was. Steady, careful, deliberate. That night, I drafted a plan, a small company focused on user experience for healthcare technology. No big offices, no investors, just focused work that mattered. I called it Clarity Health Design. By the end of the week, I had registered the name, set up a modest website, and emailed 2 trusted colleagues asking if they'd consider joining me. One replied within an hour, "If you're leading it, I'm in." The following months blurred into long days of design mock-ups and client meetings, each step bringing a small satisfaction I had never known at home. When our first contract came through, I took a photo of the signed document and printed it, taping it above my desk. On it, in neat black letters, were the words, "Clarity Health, Design Founder, Hannah Pierce." The same hands that once paid her parents' mortgage were now signing her own future into existence. One early morning as I walked to the office, we'd rented a narrow space on the 3rd floor of a brick building near Kendall Square. The city felt brand new. The air carried the smell of rain and car exhaust, and the sidewalks glistened under a thin mist. Inside the room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the computers and the scratch of pencils over graph paper. I had written one line on a white sheet and taped it to the wall. "We design clarity for those who save lives." It wasn't about profit, it was about purpose. Clients came in slow but steady. Within months, our income had tripled compared to my freelance days. Mark stopped by one afternoon, standing in the doorway with a smile that reached his eyes. "Looks like you didn't need anyone to rescue you after all," he said. I smiled back. Maybe I just learned to stop offering rescue to people who never asked for it. He nodded once, understanding without words. I paid off my student loans that fall. The email from the bank confirming the final payment felt like closing a chapter that had followed me for too long. The apartment I'd once called temporary became a home. I added small things, a framed photo of the Charles River at dusk, a handmade mug from a local shop, a stack of notebooks filled with ideas for the next version of our software. I no longer felt the need to explain where I'd been or what I was building. The work spoke for itself. By the time winter came again, the city outside had turned silver with frost. I watched the lights from my office window, a cup of tea warming my hands. My reflection in the glass looked calm, older somehow, but not tired. I thought of Lily somewhere out there, still shining under the kind of attention that once defined her worth, and I wondered if she ever looked my way, now that the distance between us was measured not just in miles, but in silence. That night, my inbox pinged with a new message. The subject line read, "Harvard Innovation Lab Mentorship Invitation." I opened it slowly. They wanted me to return to campus as part of a startup mentorship program to share my work with students building their own healthcare projects. I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle. For the first time, I'd be walking into a Harvard building not as a student trying to prove herself, but as someone who had already built something of her own. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, and I smiled quietly to myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this, whatever came next, it would be on my terms. And somewhere beyond that first cold gust of winter, another storm was already forming, one that would bring my past straight to my doorstep again. The winter passed slowly that year. My days filled with projects, meetings, and deadlines, the kind of work that required equal parts patience and precision. Clarity. Health design had grown faster than I expected. We had 6 ongoing contracts, 2 new hires, and enough income to cover the next 12 months of expenses. I spent most evenings at the office watching the snow gather along the window ledge as the city lights flickered below. It was the kind of quiet that used to feel empty, but now felt earned. One Thursday evening, I stayed late finishing revisions for a hospital client in Chicago. The building was nearly empty, only the sound of the old radiator clicking in the corner. My phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with a single word, Mom. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Her voice trembled as she said, "Hannah, it's your father. He's been trying to reach you." There was a pause, then the faint sound of a man clearing his throat. "The house," Dad said, finally. "We're behind again. They sent a notice." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. "How far behind?" I asked. 2 months. "Maybe 3, he answered. Mom's voice broke in quick and defensive. "If you'd just helped with 1 or 2 payments just until we catch up, this wouldn't have happened." Her words sounded practiced, like a script rehearsed over dinner. I took a breath. "You had over 1.5 years to plan ahead," I said quietly. "You knew this was coming." The line went silent. Then Dad spoke again, low and clipped. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I ended the call without another word. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to the front door of my office. No return address, just my name and my mother's handwriting. Inside was a photocopy of the foreclosure notice and a short note. "If you ever cared about your family, you'll do the right thing." I folded it once and slipped it into my drawer. The ink smudged faintly where her pen had pressed too hard. By March, the situation at home had worsened. A cousin sent me a message saying my parents were fighting with the bank and that Lily had been staying with them to help. I hadn't heard from my sister in months, not since the graduation dinner. The distance between us had stretched from silence into something permanent. Still, part of me wasn't surprised when her name flashed across my phone one rainy afternoon. She started the call with small talk, asking about work, about the city, about whether I was still at Harvard Square. Then her tone shifted. "They're really struggling, Hannah. Dad barely sleeps. Mom keeps saying you could fix everything if you wanted to." I let her words hang there. "You're the one they listen to now," she added softly. "If you called the bank," I cut her off gently. "Lily, I'm not calling anyone. I've done my part." She sighed, and for the first time, her voice lost that easy confidence I'd always envied. "You've changed," she said. "You used to care about this family." I thought about what to say, then answered simply, "No. I just stopped paying for love." The line went quiet. After a moment, she said, "I'll tell them you said no." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "They'll understand if they're willing to look," I replied, and the call ended. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain outside beat against the windows in slow, steady bursts, and the city hummed softly beneath it. I sat at my desk, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the dark glass. The woman looking back wasn't angry anymore, only certain. Every choice I'd made had been building toward this learning that silence could speak louder than explanation. The following week, our firm received an invitation to present at a healthcare innovation conference in Boston. It was a chance to showcase our latest project, a streamlined interface for patient communication, and to meet investors. I arrived early that morning, the air still crisp with the last traces of winter. The event hall buzzed with conversation, the scent of brewed coffee filling the space. When I stepped onto the stage to give my presentation, a hush settled over the room. I spoke about design not as decoration, but as empathy, a way to make information feel human again. When I finished, the applause came slowly at first, then stronger, steady, real. Afterward, a familiar voice called my name from the crowd. I turned and saw Mark Ellison smiling. "You did it," he said, shaking my hand. "You've built something solid." I smiled back. "It's still small." He laughed. "So was Metaview once." His confidence in me carried a weight I hadn't realized I missed. Before leaving, he added, "If you ever want to expand, I'll help you find the right investors. You've earned it." That evening, I walked home through the city streets, the wind cold but clear. Lights from nearby apartments glowed against the windows, each one a small world of its own. For the first time, I felt the quiet hum of belonging to no one's expectations but my own. A few days later, a new email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "Request to reopen mortgage account, pending verification." My stomach dropped. The message was nearly identical to the one I'd received months before. I called the bank immediately, explaining the history of the unauthorized attempts. The representative's tone turned serious. "We've flagged it again," she said. "All payment modifications will remain locked to your authorization only." I thanked her, hung up, and sat back in my chair. It wasn't anger I felt this time, just a deep, steady calm. Some lessons repeat themselves until you refuse to participate. Spring turned to early summer, and life found its rhythm again. The company grew quietly, our reputation built on consistency and care. We moved into a larger office space near Kendall Square, just 2 blocks from the old apartment where I'd first written the idea for Clarity Health Design on a scrap of paper. On the wall, I hung a single frame, the photo of my first signed client contract. Underneath a small brass plate read, "For the ones who learn to build peace from silence." Late one afternoon, as the sun filtered through the blinds, my assistant knocked softly on the door. "There's someone here asking for you," she said. I looked up from my screen. "Who?" She hesitated. "She says her name is Lily." For a moment, I just sat there, hands still on the keyboard. It had been more than a year since I'd seen my sister. The last time she had looked radiant under the glow of graduation lights, the golden child with the promise of Europe and everything that came with it. I stood slowly smoothing the edge of my blazer. "Send her in," I said. When the door opened, Lily stepped inside quietly. Her hair was pulled back, her coat too light for the wind outside. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen before. Her eyes moved over the office, the framed contract, the notebooks, the plant by the window, and then settled on me. "You look different," she said. Her voice carried no malice, only fatigue. I gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "Mom's sick," she said finally. "Dad's been losing sleep. They got another notice from the bank. This time it's final." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that." Her jaw tightened. "You could help them." I met her eyes. "I already did." She shook her head, the motion small and frustrated. "You're destroying this family." I stood then calm, but certain. "No, Lily. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending everything was fine." She stared at me, her expression shifting between disbelief and hurt. "You've changed," she said again, but this time it sounded less like accusation and more like recognition. I smiled faintly. "No, I've just started living my life the way I should have all along." For a long moment neither of us spoke. The sound of traffic drifted up from the street below. Finally she nodded once, as if the conversation had nowhere left to go. "I'll tell them you said no," she murmured. "You don't have to," I said. "They'll understand if they want to." She gave a faint nod and turned toward the door. When it closed behind her, I exhaled slowly. The office was quiet again. Outside, the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the floor. I picked up my mug, now cold, and looked at the empty chair where she had stood. It struck me that this was the first time in years I hadn't felt small after a family confrontation. The city's hum carried on outside, steady and unbothered. Somewhere between that moment and the one that would follow, I realized the distance I had created wasn't loss, it was freedom. But deep down, I knew something was coming. Secrets like ours never stay buried for long. The weeks after Lily's visit felt strangely still. I threw myself into work, filling every hour with deadlines and design reviews until there was no room left for thought. Clarity Health Design was thriving. We'd just signed a contract with a major hospital network, and every new project felt like a quiet victory carved out of years I'd once spent invisible. Yet even on the busiest days, part of me knew the quiet wouldn't last. Families like mine didn't fade away. They resurfaced when pride collided with consequence. It started one Friday morning. I arrived at the office early to prepare for a client call, and my phone buzzed nonstop before I even set my bag down. At first I ignored it, unknown numbers, local area codes, but then a text appeared from my cousin Jenna. "Check Facebook. It's about your parents." My stomach tightened. I opened the app and saw it immediately. A photo of my parents' bank statement had been posted to the family group. My old mortgage transfers circled in red, the memo line visible, Pierce household, Hannah contribution. Beneath the photo, Aunt Carol had written in all caps, "I can't believe this." Hannah paid their mortgage for almost 2 years, and they never said a word. Dozens of comments followed, some shocked, others angry, a few defensive. My mother's name appeared in replies, trying to explain, but her words were drowned out by the outrage. I sat at my desk reading in silence as the story unraveled in real time. Within an hour, the post had spread beyond the family group. Friends, neighbors, even people from our old church were sharing it, each adding their own disbelief. I closed the app and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I hadn't sent those records to anyone. Then I remembered. 2 nights earlier, while preparing my taxes, I'd attached the folder of mortgage transfers to an email from my accountant. The family's shared address, still in my contacts, must have autofilled. One small click had exposed everything. By noon, my phone was full of messages. Some were kind people saying they were proud of me for standing my ground. Others were harsher, accusing me of humiliating my parents. I didn't respond to any of them. The truth had finally spoken for itself, and there was nothing I needed to add. That evening, my mother called. Her voice came through shaky, edged with panic. "Hannah, what did you do? You could have kept this private. Everyone's talking. Your father can't even go to church." I let her finish before answering softly. "I didn't tell anyone, Mom. I just told the truth when I paid those bills." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You've ruined us," and hung up. 2 days later, my father called. His voice was stripped of its usual authority. "Do you realize what this has done? People think we took advantage of you. I've lost face with everyone I know. What did you gain from this?" I closed my eyes, listening to the weight behind his words. "The only thing I said, was stop covering for you." The silence that followed was heavier than anger. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted from fury to something closer to disbelief. "You really don't care what happens to us, do you?" I didn't answer. He hung up first. News spread faster than I expected. Within a week, the small town where I'd grown up was buzzing. Neighbors whispered at the market. My mother stopped volunteering at church. My father's colleagues pulled away. The illusion of the perfect Pierce family had cracked, and no one could tape it back together. Then came the letter from the bank. One of my contacts in finance forwarded a copy of it before my parents could. The house was officially in foreclosure. The letter was brief and impersonal, just numbers dates, and the phrase "primary funding source" discontinued. I stared at those words for a long time. It didn't bring satisfaction or regret, just stillness. The story was finally catching up to itself. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the lights below blurred by mist. I imagined my parents sitting in that old house, surrounded by boxes, the silence between them louder than any argument. Maybe they were still blaming me. Maybe they were just beginning to understand. Either way, the weight no longer belonged to me. A few days later, I went back to work as usual. Life outside that circle kept moving, the steady hum of meetings, the soft chatter of my small team, the satisfaction of seeing our latest design go live. My phone buzzed again that afternoon. It was Mark. "You okay?" he asked once I picked up. "I heard something about your family." Small towns have long echoes. His voice carried no judgment, only concern. "I'm fine," I said. "It's just noise." He paused. "Then let it stay." "Noise," he said, and I could hear the quiet understanding in his tone. Weeks passed, and the dust began to settle. The family group chat that once buzzed daily had gone silent. I focused on preparing for an upcoming healthcare tech conference where Clarity Health Design would present a new partnership. The evening before the event, I stayed late at the office. Outside, the city glowed under early summer rain. Inside, everything felt calm until I opened my inbox and saw an email from Lily. Her message was short. "Mom's not doing well. Dad says it's stress. She's barely sleeping." I thought you should know. I read it twice before closing the laptop. There was no anger in her words this time, just fatigue. Still, I didn't reply. Some conversations needed more than an email to be mended. 2 days later, I ran into Lily unexpectedly. I was walking out of a cafe near the office when I saw her standing by the curb holding a takeout cup, her hair pulled back under a gray hood. She looked thinner, the brightness that used to define her replaced by something quieter. She spotted me and hesitated before walking over. "I wasn't sure you'd stop," she said. I smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "They lost the house, Hannah." I nodded. "I know." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "They're staying with Aunt Carol for now. Dad barely leaves his room. Mom keeps saying she doesn't understand how it all fell apart so fast." She looked down at the wet pavement. "Maybe she does," I said gently. Lily's voice broke when she spoke again. "They miss you." I studied her face, the familiar curve of her features so close to mine. "I don't think they miss me," I said. "They miss the version of me that kept saving them." She didn't argue. After a moment, she whispered, "You really have changed." I shook my head. "No. I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine." We stood there for another minute, the rain softening into a mist around us. She finally said, "I'll tell them you're okay." I nodded. "You don't have to explain me anymore. They'll understand someday." She gave a small nod, her eyes glistening, then turned and walked away. When she disappeared into the crowd, I stood still for a while, the noise of the city swelling and fading around me. There was no triumph in that moment, no sharp relief, only release. The kind that comes after years of holding your breath. That night, back at my apartment, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window as the lights of the Charles River shimmered against the dark. The phone lay silent beside me. For the first time in a long time, it didn't matter if it rang or not. I watched the reflection of the city ripple across the water, and somewhere in that quiet I understood that what had ended wasn't family, it was obligation. Still, a small part of me knew this wasn't over. There were wounds that didn't close with silence alone, and sometimes even the truth has its own way of coming back when you least expect it. The summer that followed was quieter than any I could remember. By July, the scandal around my family had faded from local gossip, replaced by newer stories, fresher distractions. But the silence that settled in its place wasn't peace, it was the sound of consequence. I learned through Lily that my parents were living in a small rental house outside Worcester, surrounded by boxes they hadn't unpacked. Their voices never appeared on my phone again. Only the occasional message from my sister reached me, short, factual, never emotional. At the office, life continued forward. Clarity Health Design had grown into a small but respected name. Our new software partnership had been picked up by a Boston medical network, and for the first time, I had a team working late because they wanted to, not because they had to. One evening, as I reviewed the latest analytics, Rachel Nguyen, one of my junior designers, stopped by the door. "You ever plan to slow down?" she teased, smiling faintly. I looked up from my screen. "Maybe after the next release," I said. She laughed. "You've been saying that since I started here." I smiled, realizing she was right. After she left, I sat in the quiet office, surrounded by the soft hum of machines. The walls were lined with sketches, sticky notes, and faint shadows from the evening light. Success looked different than I'd imagined. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply being content enough to breathe without waiting for something to collapse. That peace lasted until late August. One Monday morning, I walked into the office to find a stack of mail on my desk. Most of it was routine contracts invoices, but at the bottom was a letter addressed in my mother's handwriting. The paper inside was creased, the ink slightly smudged. It began simply, "Hannah, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I understand now. You were never ungrateful. You were just tired." The rest of the letter described the quiet of their new life. How Dad rarely spoke, how she'd started working part-time at a fabric store, how Lily visited once a week with groceries. At the end, she wrote, "I'm sorry for letting pride speak louder than love. I see now who kept us standing all those years. You deserved better from all of us." I read it twice, then folded it carefully back into the envelope. For a long time, I just sat there, my hand resting on the paper, unsure what to feel. The words didn't fix anything, but they carried a kind of weight that made silence less heavy. Later that week, I told Mark about the letter. We were sitting outside a coffee shop near Kendall Square, the air thick with the scent of rain and roasted beans. He listened quietly as I spoke, his expression thoughtful. "You going to respond?" he asked. I stirred my coffee, watching the ripples spread. "I don't know," I said. "Part of me thinks it's too late." He nodded slowly. Maybe it's not about timing, he said. Maybe it's about you deciding when to close the door for good this time. His words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. The next day, I found myself driving west toward Worcester without really planning to. The highway stretched quiet and open under a pale sky, and with each passing mile the years I'd spent keeping distance began to feel less like defiance and more like preparation. When I reached the address on the letter, the house was smaller than I expected. Plain beige, siding a narrow porch, a few tired plants in mismatched pots. I parked across the street and sat for a while engine off, watching the curtains flutter in the window. Through the screen door I saw movement. My mother, her shoulders thinner, her hair streaked with more gray than I remembered. She bent to pick up a package on the porch, and for a moment I almost got out of the car. But I didn't. Something inside me knew the time wasn't right, not yet. I reached for the envelope on the seat beside me and placed it under the windshield visor. Inside it, I'd written a short reply the night before I received your letter. Thank you for understanding. I wish you peace. I would mail it tomorrow. That felt enough for now. When I drove back into the city, the sun was low behind the skyline, casting long orange streaks over the river. I stopped by the office before heading home. The space was empty except for Rachel still typing at her desk. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "You're here late too?" she asked. I nodded, setting down my bag. "Old habit," I said. She hesitated before adding, "You know, Hannah, people here really look up to you. Not because you built this company, but because you don't let anything break you." Her words caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled and said, "Thank you, Rachel. That means a lot." After she left, I stood by the window overlooking the street below. The office lights reflected faintly in the glass, and for the first time I could see both versions of myself, the one who used to fix everything for everyone, and the one who had finally learned how to let go. Somewhere between them was balance, quiet, but solid. 2 weeks later, the mentorship program at Harvard began. When I walked into the innovation lab that first morning, the air smelled faintly of coffee and new paper. The same campus where I'd once felt invisible now felt open, welcoming. The students gathered around the long tables looked nervous but eager. I introduced myself, shared a bit about my journey, and talked about design as a form of empathy, how technology could make life easier if built with care. Their questions were thoughtful, their energy bright. I saw in them the same hunger I'd once carried, the hope that someone would believe they could do something worthwhile. After the session, one of the students approached me, a young woman with dark curls and a shy smile. "I read about you in the alumni journal," she said. "You're the reason I applied to this program." Her words stunned me for a moment. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means more than you know." She grinned. "I want to build something that helps people too." As she walked away, I felt something shift quietly inside me. Legacy. I realized didn't always come from applause. Sometimes it came from a single echo in someone else's beginning. That evening I received a message from Lily. "Mom's in the hospital. Exhaustion mostly. She asked for you." I sat still, the glow from my phone casting a faint light on the table. Outside, the city moved as usual, cars passing, voices drifting from nearby streets, but everything around me felt muted. I typed a short reply, "I'll come tomorrow." Then I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and let the quiet fill the room. Morning came gray and heavy. The hospital was a small community facility, clean but tired-looking. When I walked into the room, the steady rhythm of a heart monitor filled the space. My mother lay propped up by pillows, her skin pale, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the cup of water on the table. Lily sat beside her, her eyes red but calm. When she saw me, she stood. "You came," she whispered. I nodded, stepping closer to the bed. Mom's eyes opened slowly. For a second she looked confused, then relief softened her expression. "Hannah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you really came." I pulled a chair close and sat beside her. We didn't talk much at first. There was nothing left to explain, no arguments left to replay, just the quiet between breaths. After a while she said, "You were right to walk away." Her fingers trembled as she reached for mine. I see that now. I squeezed her hand gently. We all did what we thought we had to, I said. Her eyes closed and a faint smile appeared on her face. You made it, though, she murmured. You really did. We sat together until the nurse came in, her footsteps soft on the tile. When I finally stood to leave, Lily followed me to the hallway. She's going to be okay, she said. I nodded. I know. She hesitated before adding, Thank you for coming. I gave her a small smile. Take care of her, I said. She nodded, her expression thoughtful, maybe even grateful. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window watching the rain trace slow lines down the glass. My reflection looked softer, somehow less guarded. The chapter that began with silence was finally finding its closing line, but deep down, I sensed there was still one final moment, waiting, one last thing left to say before peace could truly take its place. When morning came again, the sky over Boston was a pale gray, and the air felt clean after a night of rain. I drove to the hospital one last time, the streets still damp, headlights glimmering against puddles. By the time I reached my mother's room, the nurse was adjusting her blanket, and Lily sat by the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. Mom looked stronger, color had returned to her face, and the soft lines around her mouth no longer seemed weighed down by regret. She smiled when she saw me. You came back, she said, her voice steadier than before. I nodded and pulled up a chair beside her bed. We talked quietly for a while about the weather, about Lily's new job at a small design agency, about the garden Mom hoped to start once she was home again. For once, there were no apologies left to give. What needed saying had already been spoken between the lines of her letter and my silence. Before I left, she reached for my hand and held it gently. You were always the one who kept things standing, she said. Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't break. I see that now. I wish I'd said it sooner. I squeezed her hand the way I used to when I was little. You're saying it now, I told her. And for both of us, that was enough. When I stepped outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, lighting the edges of the parking lot in gold. Lily followed me out, stopping by the car before I opened the door. She really is trying, she said softly. Dad, too, in his own quiet way. I nodded. Maybe that's all any of us can do. She gave a small smile, one that looked more like peace than apology. I'm glad you came, she said. For the first time in years, her words didn't carry expectation, only gratitude. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us began to soften. We didn't fall back into the old patterns. We built new ones, careful and honest. I visited when I could, bringing small things, flowers from the market books for Mom, a laptop for Lily to help her with her design work. We never talked about the house, the scandal, or the years of silence. Some things were better left as lessons rather than conversations. At Clarity Health Design, life moved forward. Our newest program was launched successfully, earning recognition from a national healthcare magazine. The photo they used for the article showed me standing beside my team, smiling in front of the company logo. The caption read, Founder Hannah Pierce on designing empathy into innovation. Seeing those words printed on the page, I realized how far I'd come from the daughter who kept everyone's world together to the woman who had finally learned to build her own. A few months later, I stood on stage at a charity event hosted by Harvard's Innovation Lab. The auditorium was filled with students, mentors, and alumni, all gathered to celebrate the year's achievements. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out over the audience and thought about every person who had taught me something, Mark, who believed in me when I didn't, Rachel, who reminded me that leadership wasn't about perfection, and even my family, who showed me what happens when love depends on sacrifice. I spoke about boundaries, about how sometimes walking away is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and others. I told them that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. It means choosing peace over resentment, truth over illusion. The applause that followed wasn't loud or showy. It was steady, sincere. I could feel it in my chest, like the echo of something finally settling into place. When I returned home that night, the apartment felt different. Not empty, just quiet in a way that felt safe. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the river. The lights shimmered on the water, the same view I'd stared at countless times before, but tonight it looked softer, more forgiving. On the shelf nearby sat a small framed photo Lily had given me a few weeks earlier, our family years ago, standing in front of the old house before everything fell apart. The edges of the picture were worn, but the faces inside it told a story that finally felt complete. I didn't need anyone to rewrite the past or fill in what was missing. I'd done that myself, not with grand gestures, but with small, quiet choices, the kind that no one applauds, but that change everything. My parents were learning Lily was healing, and I had found my balance between independence and grace. Life doesn't always give us clean endings. Sometimes it gives us small reconciliations and moments of understanding that arrive years late, but still right on time. I'd learned that justice isn't revenge, it's truth standing on its own 2 feet. And peace isn't something you wait for, it's something you decide to keep, no matter who notices. If you've ever had to walk away to find yourself again, I hope this story reminds you that it's not selfish to choose peace. Sometimes that's the bravest thing any of us can do. And if it spoke to you, take a moment to share it or simply sit with it a while. Either way, thank you for listening.